Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the Q&A portion of the Milton Film Festival. I'm Indira Naidoo-Harris, the host of the festival. Today, we are taking a look at the complex, thoughtful, and well-crafted film, Black Bear. This is a clever, carefully constructed film that in many ways forces us to take a look at the process behind artistic inspiration and creation. Black Bear is divided into two distinct parts. The first part, we're introduced to Allison, a filmmaker played by the amazing Aubrey Plaza, who is taking a vacation on a property owned by a bickering couple in the Adirondacks. The group soon falls into a game of desire, manipulation, lies, and even jealousy. But then the story flips, and part two of Black Bear becomes something far more complex, a film within a film where the actors are being manipulated, and so are we. Joining me now to talk about his clever film that is really a puzzle of sorts is writer and director Lawrence Michael Levine. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lawrence. It is so good to have you here with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Lawrence, I have to tell you that this is a film that I will remember for a long time. And that's because it doesn't just have a compelling storyline and dialogue, but it also forces you to think. You know, this film doesn't tie everything up in a pretty bow, but forces you to go back over and over again, searching for more clues about your message and really the true meaning of the story. So I have to ask you, what in your words is the true message of the story, would you say? What was it that you were trying to say and were hoping people got?
Well, I would describe it as being twofold. I think for me, when I started writing this film, I was in a lot of, I was in a lot of personal pain, and then there was also a lot of political chaos in the country and social chaos in the country. And I wrote it almost therapeutically. I rented an office for myself, and I set myself the task of writing something that would show me about myself and that would maybe help me find a way to move forward. And in a way, I didn't have a great plan. Well, I didn't have this was one of the least planned out movies that I've ever written. But what it revealed to me by the end was exactly what I was hoping to achieve from it, which is just that through art, there's an alchemy that goes on where you can translate negativity into something more positive, which is the creative act. But it's not so easy to do that. You have to take a really long, hard look at yourself, especially if you want to change and move forward. You have to look at your flaws and where you failed. And so the movie functions, if there's any message at all, it's that through art, that there are ways in life to turn your negative experiences into something more positive that connect you to the rest of humanity. One of those ways is art. And for the main character of the film, who's in some ways a doppelganger for myself, that's the case.
So many layers and such an intense film in many ways. And I really understand what you're trying to say when you say, you know, it forces you to take a look at yourself, because it also allows you to look at the same situation. And that's what you're doing in this film, but from different perspectives and different angles, really. An interesting concept, because essentially it's a film within a film and maybe even, you know, another film. So how did you come up with that concept for Black Bear? Did that come to you right away? Because you said it kind of wasn't as organized as some other things you have written. So I'm curious about how you came up with the concept.
Yeah, it was less organized than previous things I had written. And for that reason, I remember less about why I made the decisions I made. I went to work every day, and I didn't know where the movie was going. So I was continually surprising myself every day. I didn't have an outline. And I only went back and worked on the film structurally after I had written a first draft. So I learned what it was about through this kind of intuitive process, and scenes were really flowing out of me. There are times in my life, particularly, usually, oftentimes is a time when I'm really searching my soul, that I start to work on something that starts to write itself. And it feels like I'm channeling something outside of myself in a way. So I don't exactly know where the idea to make the film structurally the way it is came from. I know that I was looking to explore different kinds of story structure because I make my living as a Hollywood screenwriter, and I write a lot of stuff with studios and production companies that's more workshopped, and there's a very regimented way that things are done. There's a certain order of things. You pitch it, you do the outline, you get notes on the outline,
Yeah.
you do the draft, you get notes on the draft, you do another draft. It's very, you have to let the executives or producers you're working with know what you're up to before you start to work on it at almost every step. So I, I found that a little bit constricting. And then also, it's a 3-act, eight sequence structure that all these Hollywood films employ. And it's not the only way to make a movie. You can make movies that are interesting in other ways. And I wanted to explore some of that. So I knew I was interested in taking some formal chances. And I was influenced more by European and Asian filmmakers that are a little more adventurous structurally.
And really, it came through very well in terms of the actual, inspiration and the great story that you were able to come up with, even though you weren't going through it in that structured way. I mean, I think it speaks volumes in the end about the artistic process, essentially, because it sounds to me like you almost gave yourself the freedom to just write and see what came out. And essentially, you came out with this, interestingly enough, very structured film, and it would have had to have been very structured. 2 stories, possibly 3. Actors, in one situation, and then their motivations change, and then they're in another. And meanwhile, the viewer is trying to figure out, how all of these pieces had to come together in a very complex way. And what you're saying to me, in some ways, is that you approached this structured kind of puzzle by letting yourself just freely write and not having a structured way of approaching the script?
Well, I wanted to see if I could, and I think if you look at a guitar player, for example, or something like that, for years and years, you have to practice scales, and eventually you start to play the scales without thinking about them consciously. So I wanted to see if I had learned enough about structure that I could just start to write, and my subconscious would figure it out. So the only preparatory work that I did was I thought about the characters, who they were, and I kind of started to imagine these very 3-dimensional people, and then they just started talking to each other.
Yeah, and I think your comment about the about music and sort of, I always think about it as the jazz musician, who learns classical music, when they're growing up and learning how to, work whether it's a piano or something else, and then after all those years of training, they let go, and then all of a sudden this amazing music and these amazing compositions flow out of them, and that's essentially what you're talking about. Um,
Yes, yeah.
in many
I
ways.
was
Sorry,
hoping that
go
would
ahead.
happen. I was just hoping that would happen.
And it did amazingly well, and remarkably, inspiring in terms of just how you had those stories weave in and out of each other, and yet be so different in so many ways. You touched on the characters, and the characters of the film are really fascinating. They're wrestling with their own inner demons. They're trying to work out, what is the appropriate next step at times, but really they're also being led along in life. And that's what you're saying with this story. Was it difficult to go through some of those pathways? I mean, you touched briefly on the fact that in some ways you were also trying to work out some things in your own life, and so was writing the script a journey for you in many ways?
Yeah, it was. I think also it was looking at my past and wanting to move on from it. My wife and I, my wife's a filmmaker also, and we've worked a lot together. We've made 6 movies together. And at times it brought us closer together, and at times it sort of tore us apart. And we had a lot of issues that we were working through or around the time of the movie. So I think some of those issues made it into the movie. And I think it did help me move past a lot of the, I guess, the trying aspects of my relationship with her. Um, so was that what you were asking?
Well, just how difficult it is to write something like that, and thank you.
No, it wasn't difficult to write. It was difficult to live through
Got it.
the
Yeah,
painful experiences that gave me the
yeah,
emotional awareness of the kinds of dynamics that happen in the film.
yeah.
Um, but not to write it. I mean, to write it, actually, this one, like I said, was pretty much, it was a pleasure in a way. I mean, it really kind of flowed out of me.
Hmm.
And in that sense, it was the easiest thing that I've ever kind of written. And it was fun because I was surprising myself every day. I enjoyed writing it. It was much harder to make the movie. It was harder to get financed. It was harder to make it, edit it. All those kind of things were harder than writing.
Let's talk about the film then, and the remarkable performances. Let's start with that. The dialogue is a puzzle, the storyline is a bit of a puzzle, and the performances in many ways are really the key to unlocking that riddle of what's happening on the screen. Aubrey Plaza was incredible. She's really dynamic, and at watching her performance was completely mesmerizing. How did you manage to get the actors, keep the actors on track, because they're switching around in their roles so much, and their emotions? They're at times playing completely different characters, yet you manage to get these very focused performances out of them, where they are, Aubrey plays at one point, a character that is the victim in some ways. In other ways, she's manipulating people, and
Mhm.
moves with such ease between those characters that it's really struck me in a very real way how difficult the performance must have been, and how you would have had to have worked with her and other characters and performers in the film.
No, I mean, it wasn't difficult to get the performances from them. They're great actors, and they made mostly correct choices. And I did very little keeping them on track. I did a lot of encouraging because they were doing well. And when they were doing something I particularly liked, I made sure that they knew. They didn't need too much guidance. A lot of it was working with them on the staging and the blocking, and making sure that they understood the scenes. We did a lot of script meetings before we started to shoot. We didn't have enough time to rehearse, but we spent the weekend before the shoot going through the script and making sure that anything that they didn't understand, that I could make comprehensible. I like to make sure that the actors are comfortable with all their lines. If there's something that doesn't feel like they would say it, I will change it for them. So I just made sure they understood the scenes, and that they weren't saying any lines that they didn't understand or that they didn't feel would be sound right coming out of their mouths. And that was really most of what I did, and knowing when to give them a little push,
Yeah.
to go farther. All 3 of them were definitely subtle actors, you know. So it was rare that they would ever overact. So sometimes they needed a push to go a little farther or deeper. Like you said, some of the scenes are painful. Not everyone's in a rush to go there.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was some of that.
Really remarkable performances, and you're right, all across the board. I concentrated on Aubrey, but the reality is that strong performances from all of the key characters, which really carried the film, and in some ways, when you think about it later on, is something that you keep thinking about because you realize the complexity of the roles that they were playing. In part two of the film, the director is manipulating his wife, the actress. Did you find yourself doing some soul searching then when you were looking at the script and seeing these actors having to go through some very emotionally demanding and heart-wrenching scenes and draining roles? Did you find yourself then starting to think about the film itself and part two and the role that the director's playing there? And did it make you start to do a little sort of searching yourself about what was happening or not?
It didn't. Yeah, I don't think the script made me feel that way. I think what was actually happening on the ground made me feel that way. You know, like you touched on before. These characters are going through agonizing things. So there's an element where I always feel a little sadistic making a movie with people because the movies I've made have all been really small. They've been emotionally demanding on the actors, and I'm aware that like I'm torturing them on several levels. They're uncomfortable because we're making a cheap movie, and I'm making them go through these terrible experiences, and sometimes I feel guilty, you know, or their day gets wasted because of some mistake the production makes, or I don't know. It's just not always easy to make indie films, and sometimes I always feel like, oh, everybody's here to serve my vision and they're not having fun. So there are times when making a film feels like a form of sadism. This film was definitely like that, especially just to watch Aubrey like having a breakdown and then asking her to do another take. There were definitely times where life mirrored art in that particular scene. It was very similar. I mean, you know, I've never consciously made a strategy I've never used subterfuge to manipulate an actor into giving a good performance. So that was more drawn from stories you read about directors like Fassbender and Kubrick and you know, Jean-Luc Godard, people like that, these crazy directors who torture their actors. So that was more of a riff on that, what you see on screen. But off screen, I definitely felt, you know, there were times where I thought, what is this we're doing here?
Yeah.
Am I torturing people for my work? So yeah, but really, I want to come out strongly against the idea of manipulating somebody to make them feel something.
And I think you made that very clear in the film. And really what I was getting at was sort of with that sort of being up on the screen and you portraying that in the film, you know, I'm sure it would have made you at sometimes feel like, oh, I'm so sorry I'm making you do this, you know. And it seems to some extent that is exactly what was going through your mind at times, especially with the difficult scenes. And that's a level of filmmaking that I have to be honest with you, no matter how many films I've watched as a viewer, I hadn't thought about before, but you captured the essence of how that can be conflicting, I'm sure, at times for filmmakers and how they have to sort of work through it and recognize that it's about the art and really getting that story up there on the screen and having people relate to it in a way that is really important for them to do. I found it fascinating to watch the scenes with the film crews in that film. You know, I've seen many films where you see, you know, something's being filmed and then they pull back and then you see the director and everything else and you see, you know, just how things are being shot. But what you were able to capture in those scenes was really something I haven't seen before. You were able to capture the energy and the teamwork and the chaos in a way that I have to say I've never seen before. You really did it in in an amazing way. How hard was that to stage and do? I mean, you talked about blocking a little bit, and there was a big contingent of folks out there. What was that like?
I was nervous on the day because I had never blocked a scene with 20 actors before. I think there are about 20 actors. That was the biggest scene that I had ever blocked. So I was nervous on the day. But the actors were so intelligent, and that includes the crew, who most of them, almost everybody in the movie who had a speaking line was an actor, but many of the extras who had specific blocking to do were actual crew members. So crew members were involved with like being on a certain mark at a certain time and doing certain business. So they had to do some kind of acting. But the actors who were the crew were all very are great actors who have great careers in America, and were really intelligent, and a lot of them were really close friends of mine. So I felt I had a lot of support, and they were all very intelligent. So it ended up being I had to do way less than I thought. I really also, I almost said this earlier, but I didn't. The best thing you can do for yourself as a director is to write conflict into your scenes, to write objectives and motivations into your scenes, to write tactics that people are taking to achieve these motivations, and to write business and activity for them to do. So a lot of the script, I know when I'm writing something, or I'm writing something like that, Black Bear, but even when I'm writing something for hire, I always try and direct the scene on the page so that I have less work to do when I direct the actual movie. So a lot of the blocking that you see in the movie was already on the page. So all the actors had to do was read the script and do it, and it kind of took on a life of its own.
I think that's probably a great way to work, is to sort of get that, do the hard work up front so that you're not trying to figure it out later on. This film was shot essentially in one location. Was that difficult to do? It was at this, I think it was a home, that was right on a lake. The different stories were essentially still told with the same location. Were there any challenges shooting in that way? Was it okay?
Generally, shooting in one location makes your life easy because you don't have to do company moves, which is moving the whole cast and crew. But unfortunately, this house had certain problems. It was really remote. The lodging for the actors and the crew wasn't particularly close. There just wasn't any. It was half an hour, 45 minutes away. So that wasn't great. It's not like everybody lived in that house, which would have been, I did, but the others didn't. And it had a solar powered generator that kept breaking. It just hadn't been serviced in 20 years or something, and it kept breaking. And we lost a few days of shooting because 50 movies were shooting in upstate New York. And all the equipment and all the crews were being utilized. So we had to import crew from San Francisco, and we had to import this generator from Canada, and we had to wait 2 days to get it. So while we were waiting for the generator to come, we had to deal with the situation where we were losing hours of time because there were blackouts. And that's when you're shooting for 19 days, 2 days that you lose are
big. Yeah, I can imagine. Just wrapping things up with the connection between the two stories, I found myself thinking about that quite a lot after I saw the film and trying to figure out what part one was trying to say and what we were trying to say with part two, where the characters switch around quite a bit. And then, essentially that last scene, which opens the door really to possibly another way of looking at the connections with the stories, because Aubrey's sitting there, she's writing in her notebook, and you're thinking, okay, which one of these stories is she writing, or has she already made the film? Was there a connection between the stories that you were trying to get across to us?
Well, there were thematic. There was a thematic connection between the stories, and I knew that one of my earliest ideas when I was thinking about this movie initially was I thought it'd be interesting to tell two stories where the same person is in the opposite position in a love triangle. So one in which she's the home wrecker, and one in which her home gets wrecked.
Mhm.
A lot of people have been on both sides of it. I've been on both sides of it. So I thought it would be interesting to explore that with a single character. And that character was a writer. And so you're supposed to, basically art is transformed experience. So at the film, you're left to wonder what the writer's relationship was to all of this. Did she actually live through it? Was one thing more real than the other? Were these just memories that she was thinking of and sitting down to write? Are these rough drafts for the thing she's about to write at the end? I mean, I had a lot of, you know, the obvious thing to connect them would have been to have the second story be the backstage drama of the first. But I thought that was too pat and obvious. And I thought it would be more interesting to make the connection more obscure and give the audience lots of clues that they could interpret and read into it various ways. I have my own sort of understanding of it, but I think it's richer for it to live in people's imagination and for them to think about it. I thought it might force people to keep thinking about the film and not necessarily what was happening, but also the significance of the things that happen.
Well,
You
you
know,
you
what's the
absolutely
morality of the film?
absolutely succeeded in that, because you're right. When part two came along, I thought, oh, well, this is going to be, I thought it was going to go down a certain pathway. And then you surprised us and the audience by not having it take that already familiar route, so to speak. And instead, had us have to deal with some other questions. And I did leave asking the very questions and considering the very things that you wanted the audience to think about. So it was a thought-provoking, very well done film, and really very nicely written. The dialogue was great. The performances were amazing, shot beautifully. So I just have to say to you, it leaves you wanting more. And what's next for you? Do you have anything in the works right now that you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah, I'm writing something now, and I'm also, I guess no, I'm working on stuff, but I don't like to talk about it too much before it's done. Sorry,
I
that's just my way.
I understand that completely. Lawrence Michael Levine, thank you so much for joining us at the Milton Film Festival. It was so good to talk to you. This was a great film, and I know we can look forward to seeing many more remarkable films. I'm especially interested in the one you're working on now, and hopefully we'll hear more about that in the next little while. But thank you, and looking forward to having you join us at the film festival here in Milton again. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Indira. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone who watched. Good night.
Good night.